Number 10. The Mephisto tank. During World War I, Germany developed what was, at the time, the most terrifying war machine on the planet. The A7V was a heavy tank introduced into the war in 1918 during its late stages. 100 models were initially ordered, but only 20 were finished and sent onto the battlefield. The vehicle was heavily armored and was the only tank produced by Germany during this war. World War I was a time of great technological innovation. The British were the first to bring their tanks to the battlefield in September 1916. The Germans had nothing to counter these British armored vehicles. Up until that point, wars had just been fought by men with guns and swords, not armored vehicles and flimsy airplanes. This was a whole new realm of warfare. Taking their inspiration from the British, the Germans designed their own monstrous tanks to be even more indestructible and frightening. They armed the A7V with 6 7.92mm machine guns and a massive 5.7cm cannon in the front. It had a top speed of about 9 miles per hour, a 24-wheel suspension, and such great power that it could crawl straight across trenches. They were first used at the St. Quentin Canal on March 21, 1918. 5 tanks were sent out, 3 of them suffered mechanical failure, but the other 2 proved to be enough to stop the British in their tracks. These days, there's only one A7V remaining from the war. It's called the Mephisto tank, and it was captured by Australian troops during the conflict. Afterwards, it was taken to Brisbane to be displayed in the Queensland Museum. Number 9. Sarin gas. One of the worst chemical developments ever made by Nazis in World War II was sarin gas. Hitler was presented with a uniquely evil opportunity in World War II to use one of the most terrifying nerve agents ever developed by scientists. But oddly enough, he didn't. Historians say Hitler himself was so appalled by the destructive capabilities the gas had that even he didn't want to use it against enemies. The creation of sarin gas goes all the way back to 1938 with a German scientist named Gerhard Schrader. It was his job to create a new pesticide to kill weevils found in German fields. What he made by mistake, though, was a toxic gas far too dangerous to be sprayed on crops. He mixed phosphorus and cyanide and came up with the first batch of one of the world's worst and most toxic chemical compounds. But then, still not quite satisfied, he tinkered with it to make the substance even more threatening. Germany produced about 12,000 tons of sarin gas before the war was finished. They had enough on hand to kill millions of people. Hitler could have dropped sarin bombs on London and completely obliterated the city, but for some reason, he never did. In the early years of war, military officers pressured Hitler to use the gas against their enemies, but he declined time after time. It's believed Hitler's reluctance to use the chemical weapons came from his own experience in October 1918. While fighting in the First World War, Hitler fell victim to a devastating mustard gas attack. He saw firsthand how the gas was capable of blinding and mutilating his friends, and he likely didn't want to do that with something much worse than the mustard gas he experienced. Number 8. The flamethrower. The German engineer Richard Fiedler was responsible for creating one of the deadliest weapons in World War I. In 1900, his new invention called the Flammenwerfer was accepted by the German army. In 1911, special assault engineers used it. But this new weapon really took off in 1915, February 26 to be exact. The German 3rd Guard Pioneer Regiment used the Flammenwerfer, better known as the flamethrower in English, to burn French trenches on the Western Front. The flamethrower wasn't a particularly powerful weapon. It only had a short range and needed constant fuel in order to work. But as a new invention, the flamethrower wreaked psychological havoc on Germany's enemies. Since World War I was mostly trench warfare, seeing a roaring hot flame gushing into the trenches and burning men alive put great fear into soldiers. The weapon could shoot a searing hot jet of flame over 20 yards. If a soldier happened to be caught in the flames, they wouldn't necessarily die. Instead, they'd be roasted alive and their skin would get burned off, leaving them forever disfigured. There was something utterly nightmarish about the flamethrower that terrified English and French fighters. The Allied forces also had no defense against it, other than just running and hoping they didn't catch on fire. Number 7. Vengeance Weapon 1. Vengeance Weapon 1 was the mother of all bombs. At least, it was until the nuclear missile came around. The very first Vengeance Weapon, or V1 for short, was launched on London City on June 13, 1944. This was about 1 week after the Allies landed in Normandy and the Nazi war machine was grinding down to a miserable end. Like a dying beast lashing out, Germany tried retaliating using their own newly developed missile system. They sent out their vengeance against the citizens of London in the form of an 1,800-pound warhead. The first bomb struck down beside a railway bridge and killed 6 civilians. The V1 flying bomb was never intended to be used as a weapon of mass destruction. The Germans designed it to attack radio control systems and take out specific military targets. Because the rocket could be directed somewhere with extremely high precision, it was meant to take out strategic points. But as Germany found themselves getting assaulted from all sides, they used their new weapon system as a cheap way to instill terror. Unfortunately for Germany, their V-1 bombs came too late to make any major difference in the war, but had they been given just a bit more time, the Germans could have used these bombs with devastating effectiveness. They had about 80 launch sites built across northern France, each one capable of launching 15 V-1 rockets per day. Each rocket could reach speeds of 400 miles per hour and could cruise at up to 3,000 feet. Number 6. The German U-boat. The most significant advancement in military equipment in World War I was the German U-boat. This was the most formidable naval weapon used in both World War I and World War II. After the First War, the Germans took this massive success and tried to amplify it, attempting to make the boats better, more undetectable, and deadlier. According to history, these German death machines sank nearly 8,000 merchant vessels and warships and killed countless people. The U in U-boat stands for Unterseeboot, or undersea boat in English. These early submarines were so effective that they could attack and destroy ships over 20 times larger than them without even getting spotted. They terrorized the Atlantic Ocean, disrupted shipping lanes, blocked supplies for the Allies, and just caused insane havoc. But the truth is that for those inside the U-boats, life was beyond miserable. Sailors weren't able to take showers, they never changed their clothes, 50 men shared 2 toilets, and the whole vessel stank like pure sweat and diesel. Mildew would grow on the men's clothes and in their shoes from the heat and the damp conditions. It was a rotten, claustrophobic experience that typically lasted at least 2 months straight without a single breath of fresh air in that time. It'd be enough to drive men crazy. Have you ever been in a submarine? Tell us in the comments below and hit subscribe while you're at it. Number 5. The sound gun. One of the most bizarre secret weapons developed by the Nazis was called the Schallkanon, or sound gun. The idea behind this weapon was that if German scientists could produce high enough frequency waves, they could potentially direct them towards incoming enemy soldiers and make their eardrums burst. The device would have rendered thousands of Allied soldiers instantly deaf. It would have been similar to if the cabin of an airplane depressurized and everyone on board had their eardrums explode. To begin the development of such a destructive weapon, German scientists experimented on prisoners. One of the main things they were testing was infrasound. They learned that by exposing someone to intense infrasound, they would get thrown into states of panic. The victims also experienced explosive diarrhea, dizziness, and abdominal pain during the trials. For the Nazis, this seemed like an extremely useful weapon to use against their enemies. But like so many other weird weapons they developed, the sound gun was a total bust. The Nazis couldn't figure out how to accurately concentrate infrared sound into a direct beam. They always ended up making themselves sick and forcing their own scientists to experience panic attacks. Number 4. Thor. In World War II, Karl Gerhardt, nicknamed Thor after the Norse god of thunder, was a self-propelled siege mortar engine designed by Rheinmetall AG. The German automotive and arms manufacturer designed and built one of the biggest and heaviest siege weapons in all of human history. Its massive cannon could shoot a 24-inch shell. The guns that shot these massive bullets were so big that they could only be operated by using a crane. The shells themselves had to be carried using modified rail cars. 7 of these monstrous instruments were built, but only 6 of them were used in actual combat between 1941 and 1945. The most famous assault that utilized the Thor weapon was when Germans attacked the Soviet strongholds of Brest-Litovsk and Sevastopol. They were also used in retaliation against the Polish Warsaw Resistance in 1944. Only one weapon has survived to this day, and nothing like it has been built since. The siege engine was designed specifically to obliterate concrete, shatter bunker walls, and decimate cities. The original shells created craters up to 49 feet wide and 16 feet deep. The force of Thor's shells smashing against the ground was similar to a comet crashing down from space. Number 3. The Comet. Speaking of comets, the Me-163B1A Comet was one of Germany's most desperate attempts at bombing the Allies. This was the only rocket-propelled interceptor on record ever used. The Luftwaffe, Germany's terrifying air force, used the comets near the end of World War II in an insane bid to bomb the Allies while they closed in on Germany. The interceptor began life as a research project in the late 1930s, but it wasn't until 1941 that the rocket motor began its flight trials. At the same time, the motor inside the Comet propelled the aircraft to a maximum speed far greater than other vehicles at the time. It was the world's first jet fighter using advanced technology well ahead of its time. and for this reason too, things didn't work out quite the way Germany had hoped. The only Luftwaffe unit given operational Comets, which were basically just prototypes, was Fighter Wing 400. It was their duty to protect the oil refineries in Leipzig. They got into a bloody battle with the U.S. Army Air Force on August 16, 1944. The Americans had never seen such fast-flying machines before. The Comets tore through the skies like falling stars, reaching speeds of a supposed 700 miles per hour. But in the end, they proved futile. The Germans suffered heavy casualties, and the Comets didn't do much to save the day. They were fast, but they lacked the endurance and reliability necessary to win wars. Number 2. The Sun Gun. In World War II, the Nazis worked on creating a weapon that could destroy all their enemies by harnessing the sun's power. They wanted to focus the sun's raw energy into a single beam that could burn and incinerate anything it touched. It was a crazy idea, like something a supervillain in a comic book would come up with. But this wasn't Lex Luthor, it was Hitler. He was real. Nazi scientists tried to figure out how to make a gigantic mirror that they could send into space. They hoped to set the mirror in orbit around Earth and somehow position it remotely to direct the sun's beams towards specific targets. The idea allegedly came from the renowned rocket scientist Hermann Oberth in 1923. He drew up plans to make a mirror about 0.62 miles in diameter, then launch it into space. It would act as a super cannon, setting fire to massive stretches of enemy territory. Theoretically, the mirror would be so powerful it could vaporize an entire city in one shot. Luckily for the human race, the development of the sun gun took too long for the Nazis to use it. Hermann estimated that it would take at least 15 years to build a mirror in the sky. The materials would have to be brought into space using rockets and then connected onto a superstructure. Maybe the technology could have eventually gotten there, but not back then. And by the time anyone could even consider starting such a long and expensive mission, the war was finished. Number 1. Krummlauf. The curved barrel gun attachment was a very strange weapon designed by Germans in World War II. It was called the Krummlauf, and technically it wasn't an entirely functioning weapon. It was more so an attachment that could be mounted onto an existing machine gun. Still, if it had worked properly, it could have been a seriously devastating piece of equipment. The Krummlauf was designed as a barrel attachment for the Sturmgewehr 44 to allow a shooter to fire around corners without putting himself in direct lines of fire. The attachment even came with a periscope device so that riflemen could pick targets without even leaving the safety of the trench. It was a very cool idea on paper, but a massive failure in reality. The Germans designed multiple versions with angles ranging from 30 to 90 degrees. The only one that even remotely functioned correctly was the 30-degree curved barrel, and even then it could only fire about 300 rounds before it burst apart and was rendered useless. It also didn't fire bullets as expected. Because of the curve, the bullets were placed under too much stress. They would shatter before even leaving the barrel, then come flying out at the end as shrapnel. The only real use the weapon modifications had in battle was for tank defense. The curved barrel could be fit to a roof or the side of a vehicle, and men could fire in all directions from safety. They were also great for close combat since soldiers could fire hot shrapnel around corners. Still, it wasn't as effective as the Germans hoped, and it certainly didn't help change the tides of war. Which of these weapons do you think was the most terrifying? Let us know in the comments, and thanks for watching the video. If you liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe and come back soon for another amazing video right here on American Eye.